Greetings, Spencer. So this is part 2 of my distance episodes going through primary source quotes on distance in the Zettel. Check out part 1 if you haven't seen it, because these were literally one video until I decided it was too long. It is very technical, and you'll need to know the primary sources in order to follow along easily. So let's get to the video. The first term we see about distance is Zufechten, or pre-fencing. This term is found throughout the manuscripts. In pretty much every section, you'll see the phrase, when you go to him with the Zufechten. We see the Zufechten being described when outside of distance or range. With the pre-fencing, then go before with your left foot. Afterwards you have come to him, and as quickly as you bind on his sword. You'll find examples like this with a pretty clear out-of-distance context, meaning that you and your opponent were not able to reach each other or harm each other with the sword. We also see Zufechten come up with the guards and postures, which should be made prior to entering a range they can hit you. Thus, position yourself with the barrier guard on your left side when you come to him with the pre-fencing. We also see Zufechten be used with the cuts. When you go to him with the Zufechten, with whatever hue you then come on him. You'll find examples of Zufechten being used up to the bind. When you come to him with the Zufechten and bind one another on the sword, then as the swords clash together, you shall feel. Now there are obviously different ways to interpret these lines, but I see it that the Zufechten is not only out of distance, but also the distance where you can harm your opponent with a full step. Now we don't actually have to do a ton of guessing, because in this case Meyer explains the Zufechten in the beginning of fencing. He describes it encompassing the guards and the strikes, which implies the Vorschlag, first strike, and the breaking of distance. So what advice do we have for how far this distance is? This means as soon as he approaches his opponent by stepping or running, he should instantly attack as soon as he is sure he could reach him with either a step or a jump. We see this line pop up many times, as soon as he sees he could reach him with a step. There is a clear line in the sand that fencers should know when they are able to strike their opponent. But we also see the opposite knowledge is required. We see that we should know when our opponent can reach us. And he knows the measure and thinks the adversary can and will reach him now. The distance isn't specific and will change depending on people's heights and weapons. We are also told frequently to strike to the head or body, and hew in approaching therewith to the head and to the body. Then he must attack to his head or to his body. What directly constitutes as body, I don't know. We all know when hands are sticking out, they are closer, but most guards are held close to the body for this very reason, so there isn't a differentiation often. But clearly the attack should always hit something if the opponent didn't react. As soon as you have done the first strike, the adversary has to defend against it, or has to take the hit. Now the opponent will move and defend, and often that will be backwards. And hew in approaching therewith to the head and to the body, and remain with your point in before his face or his breast so he cannot change through before your point. If he retreats from your Vorschlag, the point should be close enough so that he can't change through safely. How are we supposed to break that distance? Well, we're given lots of advice on that too. Often, 2 shorter steps will happen before a long one, and often you must make a short leap with short steps, and often you must take a good leap or step. We see lots of different ways that this movement can come about, leaping, springing, running, stepping, and we are told frequently to rush in and go through fast. When Lichtauer says, strike and hurry to the man, rush in, may it hit or miss. So you should quickly, in one rush, follow him. Essentially, get there however you need to, and do it fast, without being off balance. He must also be sure with the correct measure of his steps, so that he may not step too short or too long. A phrase that also pops up when dealing with the Vorschlag is, he should bravely and without fear rush in. You'll find it many times, and you may think it contrary to what I said before. However, the reason he's saying do it without fear is because the people have fear. You don't tell someone who is fine, don't be scared. You tell someone who's scared, don't be scared. Because we're all padded up, it's something that has to be recognized and somewhat simulated. And in order to not be scared of the sword and to strike the body, we're even given the advice to strike like they're not holding a sword. And never strike to the sword, but just work like he would not have a weapon, or if you don't see it. There is also one more example of a slightly different distance concept. It is somewhat interpretational, so I won't go in depth. Here we see a deliberate step to the side and being at a range where your point can just reach their hands. We see this in the crooked cut gloss. It's the edge of distance usage. This is how you shall cut crooked to the hands, and execute the play thusly. When he cuts from his right side to the opponent with over or undercuts, spring away from the cut with the right foot against him well to his left side, and strike him with crossed arms with the point upon his hands. Some try to break distance like this. I don't, and I see it as a sideways motion, keeping the body out of range. This small level of distance doesn't appear much. When striking the sword with a crooked cut, the text is less specific about stepping to the side. The squinting to the hands play doesn't quite fit here because it's a feint to the head, meaning the head may be in range. We also see a little bit of hand targeting in Messer sections, the most famous being Talhofer with the dismembered hand. Also in Paulus Kahl and Le Küchner we see hand and arm targeting. You can look at whether this is an actual distance choice or just the arm in the way. And from use, we see long point can be in this distance, but long point in Sprechfenster is something that appears and is described in both Zufechten and Mittel. In my Sprechfenster episode, I do go through some of the dangers with distance manipulation. You should make sure that they do have to step in order to reach you. You shouldn't be hanging out in a distance where they can cut your hands already if using Sprechfenster as a guard. So if that wasn't enough distance details for Zufechten, we then have the armored Zettel with even more context. We see preparing with your spear when you are off your horse and the opponent is still on, also different distances to hold your spear, and knowing when is a good distance to throw the spear and still having enough time to pull out your sword, along with all the different choices when he's dismounted and you choose to not throw the spear. So overall, there are lots of good pieces of information to see what they thought about distance, but there are so many different contexts that they didn't bother with any specifics. We see a definite can't be hit and can be hit, and a little distance there for where only the hands can be hit, although for some reason that's rarely described. Definitely put any quotes below that you've found on distance in Lichtenau's system. The plays of Nachreisen and Überlaufen, traveling after and overrunning, are also good examples of Zufechten distance manipulation. The next episode will be quotes of distance after the bind has happened in the Mittel. Thanks for watching, keep studying, keep practicing.
My shoes untied. Oh goodness. It looks so cool.